Today we look at the tradition of Islam. Islam has been called the way of submission. Here I want to make sure that we understand that submission here is not a negative, should not be taken negatively, but rather a better word may be giving of oneself entirely. And of course the root that the word Islam shares with the word peace links it to the word peace in Arabic. And so it's a peaceful giving over of oneself entirely to Allah. About 1.6 billion people in the world identify themselves as Muslims. They represent 23% of the world's population. Here we're going to enter our short historical introduction. And to begin, let's talk about the Prophet. So around the year 570 CE, a man named Muhammad ibn Abdullah was born in the city of Mecca in what is today Saudi Arabia. For reasons that will become evident as we move forward, I want to point out that Muhammad's father's name, Abdullah, Ibn means son of, so it's Muhammad, son of Abdullah. Muhammad's father's name, Abdullah, means something like a servant of Allah. Keep that in mind as we move forward. So at the time that Muhammad was born, Meccans of that time had exchanged Bedouin life for city life. But they still regarded the nomadic peoples of their region as the keepers of Arab culture. So, following the custom of the time, Muhammad's parents sent him to live with his uncle in the desert until his 5th birthday. Tragically, both of his parents would perish before this day came. Muhammad's uncle was the chief of his tribe, and under his care, Muhammad would eventually take up his uncle's trade as a caravanning merchant, traveling all around Arabia and beyond. During his travels, he would encounter the wide variety of religious expressions practiced throughout the Middle East, including Judaism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and the various tribal polytheistic traditions, all of which would play a major role in shaping the evolution of Islam. At the close of the 6th century, the mass domestication and proliferation of the dromedary camel became firmly established, making long-distance desert travel commonplace. At this time, Mecca had become the center of the pagan Arab world, and Arabs from all over the peninsula made the Hajj pilgrimage to perform the traditional rites, which included circling the Kaaba over a period of several days. At that time, the Kaaba, the massive cube-shaped shrine in the heart of Mecca, housed over 360 idols, and was overseen by the Quraysh tribe. They saw to it that during the yearly Hajj, all violence was forbidden in the city, allowing a temporary halt to tribal hostilities and blood feuds that would interrupt commerce. To further facilitate this, all tribespeople who sought the refuge of the city were required to house their tribal idols, in the Kaaba, and to pay a veneration tax to the Quraysh tribe's priests each time they worshipped in Mecca. As a result, Mecca became both the most religiously sacred and most economically important trade city in Arabia. Indeed, the Quraysh jealously and piously controlled all market trade. Seeing this, Muhammad developed a sincere concern that under the Quraysh leadership, the Arabian clans were abandoning the old tribal values to pursue personal wealth and prosperity at the expense of the wider community's welfare. Like many Arabs, Muhammad believed that Allah, Al, meaning the, and Lah, meaning God, the high god of the ancient Arabian pantheon, the tradition that he inherited, was identical to the god Yahweh, who was worshipped by the Jews and the Christians. Here we see an image of Allah in that ancient pantheon of the polytheistic tradition that Muhammad grew up in, and we can see the moon and the moon, crescent moon here, and the star, And beneath here we have some other deities in that pantheon, being, of course, a polytheistic tradition initially. Here we have Allah, again, the God, the high God, the king of gods, with his 3 daughters. Each of these daughters represented sort of a different stage in the cycle of the moon. The early polytheistic tradition being very much a moon worship tradition, a tradition that sort of directed itself or guided itself by the movement of the moon, and of course, Islam still has a lunar calendar today. So, these 3 daughters of Allah become very significant as Islam moves from a polytheistic or transforms and evolves in the life of the Prophet from something that is polytheistic into something that is more henotheistic, and that they acknowledge that there's more than one deity, but that one deity alone is to be worshipped, into a monotheism where eventually it's forbidden to worship any gods other than Allah, nor is it okay to even believe that there are any other gods but Allah. A true monotheism is developing here. So, by Muhammad's time, it was commonly held that the Kaaba had originally been dedicated to Allah. And there were some Arab henotheists who believed in the God of Abraham. They were neither Jews nor Christians. They believed in all the gods of their tradition, the gods of their ancestors, but sought to worship Allah as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were known as Hanifs. They longed for Allah to send them a prophet of their own who would unite the Arab clans, as they recognized that the singular worship of God in the Christian and Jewish traditions was something that united those particular cultures and ethnicities, and they longed for that kind of unification, and they believed that such unification could one day be theirs if only Allah or Yahweh, given however you would say the name, would just send them a prophet. So during the month of Ramadan in the year 610 CE, Muhammad was passing his 17th night of isolation and contemplation in a cave atop Mount Hira. When just after he fell asleep, he felt himself enveloped by a devastating divine presence. Here we have Mount Hira, and there's a cave here where he was, where this was going on. This devastating presence initially, it frightened him quite a bit. In his culture, in sort of the folklore of his polytheistic tradition at the time, it was widely believed that there were elemental spirits that could be good, could be bad, that had free will, that lived in the desert. They were desert spirits, and they were called Jinn. We misunderstand this term today when we use the word genie. So the Jinn were known. Jinn means something like the unseen ones or the hidden ones, and it was believed that they were made of fireless smoke. And so these Jinn would often inspire and influence and impart wisdom or oracles, or give the words to lyrical poems to many of the oracles of Muhammad's time. And Muhammad tended not to take them very seriously. Take the oracles who were influenced by the Jinn, believed to be influenced by the Jinn, very seriously, but he certainly believed in the Jinn themselves. So, of course, when Muhammad first has this encounter, he no doubt recognizes this as an encounter with the Jinn. And, of course, in his time, it was not a predominantly illiterate culture. that he adopted in terms of the Arabic culture. Not yet. So when he's having this experience, this divine presence, it envelops him just in the way that he would understand a jinn to do for a poet or an oracle. And it says to him, recite. And 3 times Muhammad refused, insisting that he was no oracle. When this presence insisted, he finally cried out, what shall I recite? What poem? What would you have me say? And then he received the first words of what would become the Quran. They are, recite in the name of your sustainer, who has created man out of a blood clot. Recite, for your sustainer is the most bountiful. One who has taught humanity how to write, taught humanity what was once unknown. So at the time, Muhammad has sort of because of his occupation, he sort of has a first look, oftentimes, of what kind of technological advances other cultures are taking part in, and things really hadn't spread too quickly to the Arabian Peninsula. It was very much cut off for so long because of the difficulty of travel. And so Muhammad, no doubt, encounters through these other traditions that they have written down revelation that is written down and no longer transmitted only orally. So it's really interesting to hear Muhammad have this first this first sort of part of the Quran, first words of the Quran, lifting up that humanity can write, and lifting up that humanity now knows what was once known, and can learn what was once unknown through the written language. So at first, as I said, he was frightened and confused, and only came to understand his encounter with the help of his wife Khadijah, and Khadija's Christian cousin Waraka, who, incidentally, I might add, was a Hanif, and it's believed that Waraka actually translated. He was a linguist who was able to translate the Christian New Testament into Arabic. Muhammad was 40 when he became the prophet of Islam. The Quran would be delivered to Muhammad one line at a time for the next 22 years of his life, until his death in 632 CE. The completed Quran was produced from communal memory in written form 80 years after the death of the prophet. There's obviously dispute about how long this written how long it took after the death of the prophet for the Quran to be written down. Very conservative estimates are 30 years. Some go too far as say 100 years. I'm comfortable with 80 years. So let's go over a few key terms that I wasn't able to cover in sort of this history, and it'll be an extension of our history understanding here. So for the first 5 or 10 years of Muhammad's mission, his message to return to the worship of Allah hardly drew the attention of the Quraysh. You see, initially it was believed that the Kaaba was dedicated to Allah. So before Muhammad was born, the Kaaba was used as an instrument of worship for Allah, the high god of the polytheistic pantheon there. And then by the time Muhammad comes on the scene, the Quraysh tribe has taken over, and they change it from the Kaaba being dedicated to Allah to being dedicated to a god named Hubal. This is likely the combination of 2 gods, at least one of them being Baal, which we hear a lot about in the Old Testament. So, initially, when Muhammad comes to the Quraysh and says, we need to rededicate the Kaaba to Allah, he does so, and he doesn't say that it's exclusively the worship of Allah that must be demanded, or that is demanded. For the first 5 or 10, 15 years or so of his sort of ministry. So, but when he began preaching the worship of Allah alone, they were forced to take notice. So that by 622 CE, the hostility of the Quraysh had grown so grave for Muhammad and his followers and his family that he was inclined to accept an invitation to immigrate to the city of Yathrib to help facilitate peace between two warring pagan Arab clans that were there. This move is known as the Hijra, and it dramatically accelerated the evolution of Islam unlike any other time in the life of the Prophet. While there, in Yathrib, Muhammad encounters not only other groups, the other two clans of the Arab clans that were the polytheistic pagans of his upbringing, but he also encounters Christians there living there in Yathrib, and then 5 other clans, as the majority were actually Jews. So Muhammad has an opportunity to really hone and to learn and to interact with Christians and Jews in a concentrated way, unlike ever before. And he was so successful in settling the dispute between the two Arab clans, and also garnering the support and befriending Christians and Jews there, that they renamed the city from Yathrib to the city of Medina. As I said, this move was known as the Hijra. So while he's there, he has opportunities, as I said, to speak to many Christians and Jews, and to sort of get the stories straight in many instances about the stories he'd heard from the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament. In many cases, he didn't quite have the details right, and a lot of those aren't even ironed out. There's some dispute between some of the what's said in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament. In those stories about what happens, and there's conflict between what's said there and what's said in the Quran about them as well. So there is one significant part here that takes place, and that is that he's able to, for the first time, to really connect his tradition, the tradition that is developing, is evolving, his tradition to the tradition of Christianity and Judaism. Through the scriptures themselves. In this, he does so in many ways, but most notably, with the help of some of the Jews in Yathrib, then now Medina, he was able to determine that the Genesis 16 text that refers to the Arab peoples, in that Muslims believe that that Ishmael. Let's see here, there. That Ishmael, who was the brother of Isaac, that Ishmael, who was sent out into the desert with his mother Hagar, who is the maidservant of Abraham's wife Sarah, they get kicked out basically, and God promises though to still make them sort of the root of a nation as well. So there was always questions about whatever happened to Ishmael, and from the Christian and Jewish perspective. And so Muhammad believed that Ishmael was the firstborn son of Abraham, began the lineage of the Arab peoples, just as his second son Isaac began the lineage of the Jewish and Christian peoples, so that these 3 traditions are linked by Abraham through this story. In addition to this, the belief from this story as well, and this is sort of a folk legend, or it's certainly a belief, is that the spring that is located in Mecca, that pilgrims use even to this day, is the spring that welled up when Hagar and Ishmael were sent into the desert, and they cried out for the Lord's help, and an angel came and led them to this spring that gave them life, allowed them to live. So there are a couple things that I want to say really quick before we move on to the 5 pillars and then the next section. Islam is a complex and delicate fusion of pre-Islamic Arabian folk religion, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Christianity. So all of these blend together to create what is now Islam. Muhammad, number two, is that Muhammad never intended for Islam to supersede Judaism and or Christianity. It was Muhammad's intent. By the time the Quran is completed, it was Muhammad's intent that just as the Jews have access to Yahweh, and to be sure, they would not have used the word Yahweh in the city of Yathrib. They would have used the word Allah to refer to Yahweh, to refer to God. That just as the Jews have access to God, that just as the Christians have access to God, that now it's the opportunity for the Arab peoples to have access to the same God once and for all. So Muhammad truly believed himself to be the prophet and helping to develop a tradition that would create access now for the Arab peoples in the ways that the Christians and Jews had as well. And he really wanted them. He really wanted to reconcile things between those two traditions as well, making sure that Christians and Jews understood themselves equally as being, as being people of God, people of the book. And so Muhammad really believes that Islam is an addition to that, and that each of these three traditions are not competing with one another, should not be competing with one another, or any one of them claiming to supersede or to be better than any of the other traditions. That they should, it's God's will that all three be equal and coexist in this regard, and even cooperate. So I think it's important to know this about Islam, and understand that many have misunderstood the Quran, and they take it out of context. So this is really important. We'll move on to part 2.